Hello ladies, a woman's presence is like oxygen, unseen yet life, giving, but her absence is like the silence after music stops, like the darkness after light fades. It teaches more, it pierces deeper, it lingers longer. And that is the truth I want to share with you tonight. Sometimes the most powerful lesson we leave behind is not in our words, but in our absence. When someone grows used to your presence, your care, your energy, your efforts, they often forget the weight of what you bring into their life. It's only when you are no longer there that they begin to realize the value you silently carried. Absence is not always about distance. It can be emotional, mental, or even spiritual. The truth is, people rarely notice the light until darkness reminds them of its worth. They may take comfort, kindness, and support for granted, but when it is removed suddenly, they are faced with the reality of what they lost. Your absence teaches him more than constant reminders ever could. It teaches him patience, because now he must learn to manage on his own. It teaches him respect, because he sees what happens when appreciation comes too late. It teaches him gratitude, because he now compares every silence, every void, every empty space with the times you filled it. It is in absence that he learns who truly mattered. It is in absence that he recognizes the weight of neglect. And it is in absence that he finally understands. Love, care, and loyalty are not permanent guarantees. They are privileges that must be cherished. So never fear stepping away when you are unvalued. Your silence, your distance, your absence. It speaks louder than any argument, louder than any explanation. For in that emptiness, he will discover lessons that presence could never teach. Absence has a strange power that presence can never hold. When you are around, when your voice, your touch, your energy are constant, people grow accustomed to it as if it will always be there. They begin to overlook the details. The small sacrifices, the quiet ways you give without asking in return. But when you step back, when the laughter is no longer in the room, when the phone doesn't light up with your words, when the care and comfort they once received is suddenly missing, the silence begins to speak. It whispers reminders of everything that was once overlooked. It repeats the echoes of moments they dismissed too easily. It magnifies the value that was hidden under the routine of daily presence. Absence does not shout, yet it forces reflection louder than any argument. It creates a space where memory becomes sharper, where every unspoken word grows heavier, where every action that was taken for granted becomes clearer, where realization comes not in a burst but in slow waves that keep returning again and again, reminding him of what was lost, reminding him of what he didn't treasure enough. Reminding him that absence carries lessons that presence could never teach, because presence is comfortable, but absence is unsettling. Presence is expected, but absence is unforgettable. Presence can be ignored, but absence keeps pulling the mind back again and again. Consistency is one of the greatest gifts a person can give, yet it is the very thing that often goes unnoticed. When you show up every day, when you answer every call, when you provide the same care, the same loyalty, the same presence, it begins to feel normal to the other person. They stop recognizing the effort it takes, the discipline behind it, the silent sacrifices hidden within it. They forget that consistency is not accidental. It is a choice made again and again, even on the hard days, even when you are tired, even when you have nothing left to give, but you still give anyway. And because it becomes a pattern, they assume it will always be there. They assume it cannot break. They assume you will always carry the weight without faltering. But the truth is, consistency is fragile, and once it is removed, the absence of it strikes harder than anything else. When the daily check-ins are no longer there, when the comfort that once felt automatic disappears, when the familiar presence that they never questioned is gone, suddenly every routine feels empty, every day feels incomplete, every moment feels longer, heavier, colder. They begin to realize that consistency was not a guarantee but a blessing, that your steady presence was not just a habit but a deliberate act of care, and that nothing feels more unsettling than noticing that what was once taken for granted no longer exists, because consistency, once broken, echoes louder than it ever did when it was whole, and the longer they sit in that emptiness, the clearer it becomes that the very thing they overlooked was the very thing that kept everything together. That consistency was never ordinary. It was extraordinary disguised as normal, and only in its absence do they begin to understand how much it held, how much it carried, how much it meant, and the thought keeps circling in their mind without pause, without rest, without an ending. Material gifts can shine, they can impress for a moment, they can decorate a memory with surface value, but they fade, they lose their sparkle, they gather dust, they get replaced, while emotional presence lingers in the heart long after the moment has passed. Emotional presence is not about what you hand over, it is about what you pour in, it is about the way you listen when the world is too loud, the way you understand even when words fall short, the way you show up not because it is convenient, but because you care. That kind of presence becomes a foundation. It becomes invisible threads holding someone together. And though they might not see it while it's there, when it is withdrawn, the emptiness becomes undeniable. No amount of gifts can replace the comfort of knowing someone truly sees you. No amount of things can fill the silence of someone who no longer hears you. No luxury can replace the warmth of consistent understanding, and once emotional presence is gone, every gift feels shallow, every material thing feels meaningless, every memory of laughter feels heavier because it was not the object that mattered, it was the soul behind it. And suddenly, he begins to realize that what he thought was small was everything, that what he thought was replaceable was irreplaceable, that what he overlooked was the very thing that kept him grounded, because emotional presence is the weight you don't see until it is lifted away. It is the heartbeat in the background you don't notice until silence reminds you it was there all along. It is the unshakable truth that love is not measured in what is given to the hand, but in what is given to the heart. And that realization does not stop. It echoes, it circles, it grows heavier with every passing moment, without pause, without ending. Distance has a way of slowing everything down, of creating silence where there was once constant noise, of opening space where there was once closeness, and in that space, the mind begins to wander, to question, to reflect. When you are near, he may not stop to think, because your presence fills every gap. Your words answer every doubt, your care cushions every fall. But when you step away, when the familiar comfort is no longer within reach, he begins to feel the weight of what he overlooked. Distance is a mirror. It shows him the truth he ignored. It reflects back the mistakes he made. It forces him to replay moments in his head, to wonder why he didn't listen more, why he didn't appreciate more, why he didn't hold tighter when he had the chance. Distance sharpens memory in a way presence never can. Every small detail becomes vivid. Every laugh echoes louder. Every missed opportunity feels heavier. And suddenly he realizes that distance is not just separation. It is a teacher. It teaches him what words could not. It shows him the value of what he lost. It creates awareness of how careless he was. It magnifies the emptiness he never thought he'd feel. And the longer the distance remains, the deeper the awareness grows, the more restless his thoughts become, the more he begins to see that closeness was never guaranteed, that your nearness was a gift, that your presence was a blessing he assumed would never leave, and the realization keeps looping in his mind. It refuses to stop. It refuses to quiet down, because distance does not fade, it does not let go. It keeps pressing on the heart until awareness becomes undeniable, until reflection becomes endless, until the truth he tried to escape keeps finding him again and again and again, without pause, without conclusion, without ending. Silence has a voice of its own, a language deeper than words, a weight heavier than arguments, and when it falls between two people, it speaks truths that conversations often fail to deliver. Words can be debated, twisted, ignored, but silence cannot be denied. Silence says, I am no longer available to be taken for granted. Silence says, you pushed too far and now I have stepped back. Silence says, if you cannot feel my absence, then you never valued my presence. And the more that silence stretches, the more powerful it becomes. In the beginning, he may not notice, he may think the quiet is temporary, but as the days pass, as the messages stop, as the calls remain unanswered, as the voice that once filled his world is nowhere to be heard, the silence becomes deafening. It presses against his mind, it forces him to remember the times when he never had to wait, when your voice was always there, when your care was always within reach. And now the emptiness makes each second feel longer, heavier, sharper. Silence teaches him that your presence was not just noise. It was comfort, it was reassurance, it was love wrapped in sound, and now that it is gone, the quiet has become unbearable. And the truth is, silence does not need to scream, it does not need to explain, it does not need to justify itself, because its message is clear. What was once effortless is no longer his to claim. What was once offered freely is now withheld. What was once constant has been broken. And he cannot unhear that silence, he cannot escape it. It follows him into his thoughts, it lingers in his heart, it echoes in the spaces where you used to be, reminding him over and over again that silence is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of lessons, full of reminders that do not stop flowing, do not stop pressing, do not stop circling his mind without pause, without closure, without ending. Presence feels ordinary when it is constant. It blends into the background of daily life like air, always there, always unnoticed, until suddenly it is gone, and the absence exposes its true worth. When you were present, he may not have counted the ways you gave, he may not have measured the peace you brought, he may not have noticed how your presence softened the weight of his struggles, how your energy filled the empty corners of his life, how your care made the ordinary days bearable. But absence strips away the comfort he thought was natural, and in that emptiness he begins to see with sharper eyes. He begins to recognize what he once overlooked. The absence of your laughter makes the silence colder. The absence of your encouragement makes his burdens heavier. The absence of your love makes his world smaller. And suddenly what he dismissed as simple was in fact essential. Absence turns memories into lessons. It takes the invisible and makes it visible. It takes the unnoticed and makes it unforgettable. It takes the taken for granted and makes it irreplaceable. And the more he sits in that emptiness, the more the truth grows that your presence was not just company. It was stability, it was light, it was strength he leaned on without acknowledging. And now he must face the reality that what he thought he could live without is exactly what his soul keeps reaching for, again and again. Absence does not hide the value, it magnifies it. It stretches it across every moment of loneliness. It paints it across every memory. It reminds him without words, without mercy, without pause, that the presence he once overlooked was priceless, and that realization does not fade, it does not soften, it does not rest. It keeps circling, keeps pressing, keeps unfolding deeper and deeper without conclusion, without closure, without ending. When absence enters, it does not just leave behind silence. It demands adjustment. It forces a person to confront life without the support they once leaned on. And in that confrontation, patience becomes necessary. He must learn to wait where once he had immediate comfort. He must learn to stand still where once you steadied him. He must learn to face his own thoughts without the reassurance of your words. Patience grows in the spaces where answers are no longer quick, where affection is no longer guaranteed, where presence is no longer certain. And as patience stretches him, independence begins to rise, because without you filling the gaps, he has no choice but to find his own footing, to manage his own emotions, to take responsibility for what he once left in your hands. Independence reveals itself in the emptiness. You are no longer there to remind him, no longer there to soften the blow, no longer there to guide him, so he must now guide himself. And though he may resist at first, though he may stumble, though he may feel the weight of loneliness pressing in, slowly the lesson becomes clear. Absence is not only a reminder of loss, it is a teacher of strength. He sees that patience is not weakness, it is endurance. He sees that independence is not loneliness, it is growth. He sees that the world does not wait for him to be ready, it pushes him forward with or without your presence. And the longer this absence stretches, the more deeply these lessons root themselves. The more often he is reminded that you once carried what he must now carry alone, that you once gave what he must now provide for himself, that you once steadied what now trembles in his own hands. Absence becomes the quiet mentor, whispering to him every day that he cannot depend on what he failed to value, that he cannot expect what he once neglected, that he must learn to survive without what he once assumed would always be there. And those whispers do not stop, they do not fade, they circle him endlessly, teaching him patience in the waiting, teaching him independence in the emptiness, teaching him lessons that keep unfolding deeper and deeper, without a break, without a conclusion, without an ending. Absence has a way of putting a spotlight on every effort that went unseen, every sacrifice that was brushed aside, every little act of care that was taken as ordinary. When you were present, he did not stop to count how many times you gave without asking, how many times you carried the weight so he would not feel it, how many times you stayed silent about your struggles so that he could feel at ease. Those efforts blended into the background, disguised as routine, disguised as something he believed would never stop. But the moment you step away, the truth begins to unravel. Suddenly he remembers the way you always checked in, the way you stayed up when he was restless, the way you reminded him of things he never thought about, the way you made sure the details were never forgotten. He begins to notice the small things that were never small, the invisible work that was never really invisible, the countless gestures that once felt guaranteed but now are gone. Absence holds up a mirror to all those neglected efforts, forcing him to recognize that what he dismissed as natural was in fact intentional, that what he thought would last forever was in fact given freely, that what he ignored was the very thing keeping him steady. And as the realization deepens, regret begins to stir, because the mind replays moments where a thank you was never said, where appreciation was never given, where gratitude was swallowed by pride or indifference. Absence does not let those moments slip away. It magnifies them, it plays them back again and again, until the weight of neglect becomes undeniable, until the silence is filled not just with loss but with awareness of how much was overlooked. And that recognition lingers, it does not soften, it does not fade. It grows heavier with time, it sharpens with memory, it refuses to let go, circling endlessly, forcing him to see, to admit, to feel what he once ignored. Without pause, without closure, without ending. Gratitude is strange, because while it should live in the moment of receiving, it often only blooms in the moment of losing. When something is present every day, when care, love, attention, and loyalty are constant, the mind grows comfortable, it stops counting blessings, it stops noticing details, it begins to believe that the flow will never stop. And then absence arrives, sudden, sharp, undeniable. And it is in that emptiness that gratitude awakens. He starts to remember the things he never said thank you for, the comfort he accepted without acknowledgement, the loyalty he thought was unshakable, and suddenly gratitude comes rushing in, but it comes too late, arriving like a tide after the shore has already pulled away. He realizes that gratitude is not about the grand gestures, it is about the countless small moments, the way you stayed when you could have walked away, the way you listened when no one else cared, the way you gave pieces of yourself that cost you more than he ever knew. And in losing those things, he begins to feel the weight of what gratitude truly is, an awareness that someone gave what they did not have to give, that someone chose him when they did not have to choose, that someone carried him when he did not deserve to be carried. But now that absence has taken hold, gratitude is no longer a light feeling. It is heavy, it is aching, it is sharp, because it is mixed with regret, because it is tied to the reality that the chance to show it has slipped away. And the more he sits in that awareness, the more gratitude grows inside him, not as a soft thankfulness, but as a relentless reminder that he should have seen it sooner, he should have spoken it louder, he should have cherished it deeper, and that thought does not ease, it does not fade, it does not rest. It keeps circling back with every memory, with every silence, with every echo of what once was, teaching him that gratitude delayed becomes regret, and regret has no finish line, no final word, no ending. Appreciation is rarely loud when something is near. It whispers softly, hidden under routine, drowned out by familiarity, overshadowed by the comfort of knowing that someone is always there. He doesn't stop to measure the warmth you bring. He doesn't pause to recognize the steadiness you provide. He doesn't fully grasp the gift of your presence because it feels permanent, it feels unshakable, it feels like it will always remain. But then absence enters and suddenly everything he overlooked becomes sharp. Everything he ignored becomes clear. Everything he dismissed becomes unforgettable. The laughter he once heard without effort now echoes in his memory. The conversations he once took lightly now replay like a song he can't stop hearing. The care he once brushed aside now becomes the very thing he longs for. True appreciation is not born in comfort. It is born in contrast, in the sharp difference between having and not having, between presence and absence, between fullness and emptiness. And as that emptiness stretches, as silence replaces your voice, as space replaces your closeness, appreciation begins to grow, not as a gentle acknowledgement, but as a heavy awareness pressing on his chest, reminding him again and again that what he thought was ordinary was rare, what he thought was replaceable was unique, what he thought was small was everything. And the more he tries to move forward, the more the absence circles back to remind him that appreciation delayed is appreciation sharpened, that value of what is gone always feels greater than the value of what is held, and that every memory now feels heavier because it carries the weight of what can no longer be touched. Appreciation becomes not just recognition but longing, not just awareness but regret, not just a feeling but an ache. That does not loosen its grip, that does not grow quiet, that does not allow peace, circling endlessly in his heart, reminding him with every breath that true appreciation lives louder in loss than it ever did in presence. And that lesson has no finish, no pause, no conclusion, no ending. Absence is often misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like anger, like withdrawal, like punishment, but in truth it is something far greater. It is a lesson written in silence, a truth delivered without words, a mirror held up to show what was ignored. Your absence is not about revenge, it is not about making him suffer, it is about allowing him to see what he could not see while you were there. It is about teaching him that every action has weight, that every neglect leaves a mark, that every taken for granted moment eventually demands recognition. Your absence is not cruelty. It is clarity. It strips away the comfort he relied on. It removes the safety net he assumed would always catch him. It dismantles the illusion that love is unconditional no matter how carelessly it is treated. And in that dismantling, he learns. He learns that kindness is not owed, that loyalty is not endless, that presence is not a guarantee. He learns that the patience you gave had limits, that the sacrifices you made had cost, that the love you offered had depth far beyond what he acknowledged. And the longer your absence remains, the more the lesson deepens. Not because you speak it, but because he feels it. Not because you remind him, but because the silence itself reminds him. Not because you force him, but because the emptiness forces him. And this lesson does not end when he realizes it once. It continues, it repeats, it expands, because every memory becomes another chapter, every regret becomes another sentence, every echo of your presence becomes another reminder that what he thought was unshakable was in fact fragile, and what he thought was punishment was in fact wisdom, what he thought was loss was in fact teaching. And the truth is, this lesson does not close, it does not settle, it does not finish, it keeps unfolding in his mind, circling without pause, pressing without mercy, teaching without conclusion, without silence, without ending. Love is not a right, it is not an entitlement, it is not something that can be demanded or expected simply because it once existed. Love is a privilege, something rare, something sacred, something that must be nurtured, respected, and valued. Yet so often, when it is freely given, when it is consistent, when it is loyal, it begins to feel ordinary, it begins to feel like a constant that will never fade. He forgets that love is a choice renewed every day, that it survives not on assumption but on care, not on pride but on humility, not on neglect but on attention. And then absence arrives, and suddenly the truth reveals itself. Love was never his to own, it was never permanent, it was never guaranteed. It was a privilege that he held only because someone chose to give it, only because someone decided he was worthy of it, only because someone poured into him when they did not have to. And now that it is gone, he begins to realize that privilege can be revoked, that choices can change, that love, once unappreciated, can slip away without return. He starts to see that love was not just about being cared for. It was about responsibility, about effort, about honoring what was given instead of assuming it would always remain. And as the absence stretches further, the lesson grows louder, reminding him that love is fragile when mishandled, reminding him that it demands gratitude, reminding him that it cannot be taken lightly. Love is a gift wrapped in sacrifice. It is time, it is patience, it is loyalty, and to treat it as if it will never leave is the very thing that drives it away. And now, in the silence, in the emptiness, he feels the weight of that truth pressing down on him again and again, showing him that love is not a permanent possession. It is a blessing that must be seen, must be valued, must be cherished. And that awareness does not soften, it does not fade, it does not reach conclusion. It keeps echoing, keeps circling, keeps unfolding, teaching him endlessly that love is never guaranteed. It is only ever a privilege without pause, without closure, without ending. Walking away is often misunderstood. To some, it looks like weakness. To others, it looks like surrender. But in truth, walking away is one of the purest, strongest acts of self-respect a person can take. It is the moment when you decide that your worth is no longer negotiable, that your love is no longer to be mishandled, that your energy is no longer to be drained by someone who cannot see its value. Walking away is not about abandoning him, it is about reclaiming yourself. It is about drawing a line where neglect has crossed too far. It is about saying without words that I will no longer remain where I am unseen, unheard, unvalued. And though he may not understand it at first, though he may think it is anger, though he may believe it is punishment, the truth is that walking away teaches him what presence never could, that love has limits, that patience has boundaries, that silence has meaning. In your absence, he begins to see that staying would have been the easier path, but leaving was the stronger one, because it forces him to face his own actions without your cushioning presence. It forces him to look at himself without your gentle corrections. It forces him to sit in the emptiness he created. And while you walk away with dignity, he is left to realize that the door closed. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring for yourself more than you cared for being tolerated. Walking away is not cruelty. It is clarity, it is freedom. It is the ultimate declaration that I deserve more than what you chose to give. And the more he reflects, the clearer the lesson becomes that your strength was not only in what you gave, but also in what you refused to keep giving when it cost you your peace. And that truth does not leave him. It does not fade with time. It grows heavier. It circles endlessly in his mind, reminding him again and again that your departure was not weakness. It was power, not surrender, but self-respect, not an ending, but a lesson that keeps teaching without pause, without conclusion, without ending. Absence is not just emptiness. It is space, and within that space realization begins to take root. When you are present, when your voice fills the silence, when your care softens the edges of his world, he does not stop to think. He does not stop to question. He does not stop to measure what your presence truly means. But when that space opens, when the familiar comfort is no longer near, when the constant attention is no longer given, when the daily presence is suddenly gone, his mind has nowhere to hide. It begins to wander back to the moments he missed, the words he ignored, the efforts he never acknowledged. Absence becomes the quiet room where realization finally echoes loud enough to be heard. It is in that stillness that he starts to see that love is not ordinary, that loyalty is not common, that your presence was not guaranteed. Realization creeps in slowly, then all at once. He remembers the laughter he once thought was endless. He replays the support he assumed would never fade. He feels the void of the love he believed was permanent. Absence gives him no distractions, it gives him no excuses, it gives him only truth, and truth does not whisper gently. It speaks relentlessly, it shows him what he lost, it confronts him with what he neglected, it reminds him of what he cannot get back. And as days stretch into nights and nights into weeks, realization does not leave. It grows sharper, it deepens, it multiplies, because absence continues to create more space. And in that space, reflection has no limit, regret has no boundary, awareness has no finish line. The more room absence gives, more realization fills it, spilling over into every thought, every memory, every quiet moment, teaching him again and again that presence was a blessing, that absence is the teacher, and that realization is the student that cannot escape the lesson. And that lesson does not end, it does not soften. It does not close, it keeps expanding, it keeps circling, it keeps pressing on him without pause, without relief, without ending. There are words that can be spoken 1,000 times and still go unheard. There are reminders that can be repeated endlessly and still be ignored. There are pleas, arguments, explanations that can be poured out until your voice breaks, and yet they fall on deaf ears. But leaving speaks in a language no one can silence. Leaving is the message that cannot be twisted, cannot be dismissed, cannot be forgotten. When you walk away, when your presence is no longer available, when your love, your care, your energy, your time are no longer his to lean on, the truth becomes louder than any sentence you could have ever said. You cannot treat what is priceless as if it were cheap. You cannot hold what is rare as if it were replaceable. You cannot take for granted what was given freely, because nothing is guaranteed. Walking away is not about making him chase. It is not about showing him what he lost for the sake of ego. It is about showing him what actions cost, showing him what neglect creates, showing him what indifference destroys. And that message is not carried in anger but in absence, not in bitterness but in silence, not in punishment but in finality. He begins to understand in every quiet morning without your voice, in every heavy night without your presence, in every small routine where your absence lingers, that leaving says more than staying ever could. Staying says, I will keep giving even if you do not see me. Leaving says, I will no longer give to where I am unseen. And the strength of that message grows heavier with time. It seeps into his memory, it circles his thoughts. It becomes the lesson he cannot unlearn. Because every moment of loss repeats the sentence without words, the strongest message you ever gave was not spoken, it was lived. It was in your absence, in your walking away, in your decision to choose yourself when he could not choose you. And that message will not fade, it will not soften, it will not end, it will echo in his mind again and again, louder and louder, without pause, without closure, without ending. And so, in the silence, in the distance, in the absence, the lessons keep unfolding, lessons he never wanted to learn but now cannot escape, lessons that whisper in the quiet and roar in the emptiness. Your absence was never meant to destroy, it was meant to teach him the weight of presence, the cost of neglect, the fragility of love, the strength of self-respect. And when he finally realizes, when the reflection turns into regret, when the awareness turns into longing, it will be too late to undo, too late to rewind, too late to return to what once was. Because your absence has already spoken, your silence has already taught, your leaving has already written the final chapter. And that chapter does not need more words, because the truth is clear. Sometimes the greatest lesson is not in what you say, but in what you no longer give, not in the presence you offer, but in the absence you leave behind.